Hello and welcome to the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. I'm your host, Clint Campbell, and you are listening to episode number 1. During today's show, we'll cover introducing you to our podcast and format, as well as introduce myself and my co-host, and then we'll get into the good, the bad, and the ugly of our 2015 deer hunting seasons. Welcome, everyone, to the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. I'm your host, Clint Campbell, along with my co-host, Phil Marchek, and you're listening to episode number 1 of the podcast. How's it going, Phil?
It's going good. It's going good.
Did you happen to get a chance to do anything interesting deer-related this week or since we last spoke?
This week, physically, no. I've had many dreams, though.
That reminds me of a blog post I had a few months ago that I included this story. It was near deer season, or coming up on deer season, and my wife and I were getting ready to go to bed. And for those of you that don't know, my wife's name is Megan, which would, I think, be 100% of the entire audience. So we were getting ready to go to bed, and deer season's coming up, and I'm getting amped up, of course, and ready to go. And we lie down, and the light's on my side of the bed. So she asked me if I could turn the light off before we hit the sack, and as I turned the light off, we exchanged the pleasantries that are usually accompanied by, a couple going to bed in the evening. He just says something to the effect, good night, honey, or good night, dear, something to that effect. And I blurt out, I love deer season. It's a true story. It wasn't planned. There was no faulty intentions behind that comment, other than I absolutely do love deer season. And I think that's a good indication of the type of obsessive deer love that you'll get week in and week out on this podcast. And as far as anything interesting as far as deer work goes, or deer related, I have had an opportunity to get back to the farm in the past month or so. Got a chance to chase some birds on one Saturday, work on some of our food plots, hang a few game trail cameras, did a little scouting on the mountain, found a nice buck bed. Phil, I know you've been back to the farm once.
Yeah, definitely excited to see a little bit more of it. I got a kind of overview. Weather didn't really work out so well when I was there, but it's exciting stuff.
Yeah, I know the weekend that we were back there, you could barely see 5 feet in front of your face. But, there's a large mountain that comprises about 40 acres on our farm that literally nobody hunts. It goes virtually untouched. It's kind of a tough hunt. The wind's a little bit fickle on the mountain. So this year I've kind of made it my cross to bear to see if I can't figure out how to hunt it and where the deer are at. I did manage to find one really nice buck bed. I thought there was a nice, potentially mature buck that was living on the mountain, and I think that this is the bed that he's using, so I'm hoping that I can locate that toad.
Yes, the unicorn.
Yeah, the unicorn for sure. So I haven't had a chance to really get back to the farm in the past few weeks to chase some birds. I've been wanting to get back to take Anna hunting, and for those of you that don't know, Anna is my daughter. She's 7 and has started shooting a bow and showing interest in wanting to hunt. So I've been trying to get her back in a blind for a turkey hunt to sit for a couple hours to start to indoctrinate her into the hunting lifestyle, but the weather really hasn't been cooperating as of late.
Yeah, weather has a tendency of not cooperating, usually more often than not.
Yeah, for sure. I think we live in Pennsylvania by way of Seattle.
Touché.
Indicated by the type of weather we've been having recently. So just want to take a moment to thank those of you joining us in this first Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. And as mentioned in the intro, the goal of today's podcast is to introduce the format and the type of content that you can anticipate hearing when you tune into the podcast. Also thought it would be worthwhile to provide you all with a little bit of background on Phil and myself, where we're from, what we're all about, just to give you a better sense of who we are and whether or not we may or may not like long walks on the beach while listening to Kenny G.
It's debatable. Yeah.
Yeah, so I thought a nice way to tie this podcast up would be if we shared a few of our interesting stories or maybe our best and worst moments from our 2015 season. And of course, if my season is any indication of what the bulk of the conversation will be around, it will likely be around the worst portion.
I got a doozy. Yeah, maybe a doozy and a half.
Yeah. I'd say you do.
Can certainly contribute.
Yeah, for sure. I think you most definitely can contribute. So I think our next order of business is really to cover off on giving some background or explanation of the format of the podcast and the type of content that we'll plan to cover. So, of course, this is our first podcast. And our plan is to put out one podcast every month. That's the plan for right now, and maybe we may look to increase that frequency if the content is coming fast and furiously, and time permits for us to do that. We would love to put out more, but for right now, we'll start with one per month. As far as the type of content we're going to plan to cover, it's going to be everything and anything deer related. Is really our plan. Phil and I are both passionate about deer hunting, bow hunting specifically, and we want to dive into as many aspects as possible related to that. Related to bow hunting. So, the strategies may include, or covering strategies may include hunting strategies, it may include food plot strategies, land management, habitat management, and things of that nature. Everything and anything really is on the table for discussion. We would love to also get some input from and some feedback from you, the listeners. If there are questions you have or questions you would like to pose for us to tackle, we're happy to do that in areas that Phil and I may or may not have any experience. We would love to be able to pull in guests from time to time to lend their experience and their expertise in specific areas. And then you'll also, be able to just kind of join the conversation that Phil and I have as two friends that love to share stories about hunting and deer hunting specifically, and sometimes the crazy life that ensues around all things deer hunting and deer related. So I think with that, that's kind of the topics that we'd like to cover. Phil, is there anything that you want to add?
Deer and deer. So, no, actually, I'm really excited to be doing this. I know, you and I have been talking about getting this off the ground a lot lately, and just happy to finally kick it off and dig in with this. So let's do it.
Yeah, no, I'm super excited too. I mean, it's like you mentioned, this is something we had been talking about, putting together for a while, and it's nice to see it's finally coming to fruition. And obviously excited to share it out with all the folks to listen to. But like you mentioned, let's just kind of get right to it, and I'll take the first stab here and introduce myself. As I mentioned at the top, my name is Clint Campbell. I started a blog called truthfromthestand.com. And really the intention of that blog was for me to document my outdoor experiences. As I mentioned, we have a farm here in Pennsylvania, and that I get to do a lot of interesting deer-related activities, whether it's habitat improvement, food plots, etc. And just wanted to use the blog as a way to document my experiences. And hopefully if someone reads it and they get something from it, that's awesome. If they read it and it's just kind of a funny story for them, then that's just as good. But that was really what the intention was to share the experiences with other folks, and hoping that maybe they can find a nugget of something to take with them from it. As far as my background, I'm from Pennsylvania. I was raised in rural Pennsylvania. My entire family, for the most part, is from rural Pennsylvania. I grew up hunting with my dad. My dad was the one who took me out and taught me how to hunt. So I was, obviously super appreciative of the time that he spent with me in the woods, teaching me how to be a woodsman, teaching me how to be safe in terms of, hunting safety and hunting ethically and morally, which I think are super important pieces of hunting. I was fortunate, growing up, that my dad did own 30 acres of land, and my had a few grandparents who also owned farmland near us, so I always had access to land to hunt whenever I wanted to, whether it was opening day for any given season or whether it was just me coming home wanting to grab a shotgun after school and going out pheasant hunting, turkey hunting, rabbit hunting, squirrel hunting, what have you. So everything from small game to up to bear hunting I've done in the past. Once I finished high school, I fast forward, I moved away to Orlando. I pursued music for a handful of years, which was a great experience. I did get a chance to hunt Alaska with my dad, doing a bear hunt, which was awesome. Then my wife and I decided to move back from Orlando to Pennsylvania as we were getting ready to start our family, and wanted to be closer to family as we had our daughter. And the plus side of that was that I was really getting to come back to be able to hunt in an area that I was familiar with, and could kind of take up all those activities again that I did when I was a kid, which is awesome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
As far as how I got into bow hunting, it's kind of a funny story how that all kind of came to fruition, because growing up, my dad was predominantly hunted with a rifle and shotgun, and that was predominantly how I was raised, and in a sense, as far as hunting was concerned. I do recall my dad going on a few archery hunts, but none that I ever necessarily went with him. It was always rifle or shotgun. So my first kind of interaction or first kind of falling in love with bow hunting was I was doing a turkey hunt the one fall, and we'd go to our cabin that we have at the farm, and a group of us guys get together, and and we have a couple drinks, and we have a good time. And the one fall turkey season, I had a little bit too much fun. It made the next morning kind of rough, but I wasn't going to be that guy that didn't get up and go turkey hunting. So I forced myself to get up, went and hit the woods, actually kind of passed out for a little while in the in the forest. And when I came to, I happened to wake up and saw some deer running after one another kind of frantically, and just kind of sat and watched them for a while. And what I was realizing was that this was natural deer activity, and I came to realize that it was really the pre-rut portion of deer season. And that was the first time I'd really ever seen natural deer movement, because most of the time that I was hunting growing up and so forth, it was always during rifle season, where if you know anything about, or if you've ever heard, you don't even have to know, but Pennsylvania kind of has that reputation for having a lot of pressure, whether it's public or private land, and that's what you usually experience in rifle season. So the fact that I was seeing natural deer movement where the deer had no clue that I was there, I was not in a tree stand, I was just sitting on the ground, and they were clueless that I was there, and they were just working this one funnel that ran along this ridge, and that was kind of what sold me on archery hunting. I was like, that type of movement to where you can actually start to predict and pattern things was something that interested me. So I just kind of fell head over heels for bow hunting, and it's kind of been part of what I do, and kind of an obsession since that moment. And some may say an unhealthy obsession, but ultimately, that's kind of what led me to starting the Truth from the Stand blog. Ultimately, obviously, led me to starting wanting to work on a podcast, and super excited to see where all these things kind of take me. Whether it's hunting some new states this coming year, and and that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
That is fantastic. Actually, it's funny. I draw a lot of similarities. So let's start from the top. As you had mentioned, my name's Phil Marchek. So the similarities that I'm referring to are, I was born and raised Pennsylvania. I grew up in the sticks, rural PA, and I got into hunting through my dad, and I think we share pretty much the same passion for hunting in general, as well as for bow hunting specifically. So my experience, where I grew up, we had a couple acres of land, nothing too big, but it basically butted up against state game land. So, I've been hunting game land for basically my whole life. I mean, I've had some opportunities to get on some private pieces of land, or right, make a trip to go hunt game land elsewhere in Pennsylvania. But I think that's kind of where our hunting experiences differ a little bit, where you're very interested in doing wildlife management, right, and with the land that you hunt, you have the ability to do so. Whereas I'm not able to necessarily cultivate the land as well as I'd like to, and get those food plots. So my hunting has differed, I think, in some ways drastically from yours, in that I'm always on the lookout for where the food is changing, and the food's not always consistent on the right, game lands, and you have to see where new sprouts are popping up, and track and not necessarily even have as much background as you do, because you're able to really scout, hang cameras, and do all that. Whereas sometimes I have to make a gut decision as to where I'm sitting, and luckily for me, we're at a part of the game land where we don't have a lot of hunters. I mean, rifle season's different. There's typically a lot of pressure, regardless, because it's game lands. But right, from an archery perspective, it's pretty quiet. I will say I don't have, in rifle or archery, I don't have long shots. Longest rifle shot I've taken was probably just shy of 100 yards. But a lot of my stuff is in brush. I hit the stands pretty hard, but it's close quarters. So when I see a good shot, it's usually 30 yards or closer. Mm-hmm. But kind of backtracking to how I got into it, as you had mentioned through your dad, it was the same with me, but it was kind of like what we did back in the day, just from where I was from, and I'm sure it was kind of to that point for you as well. It's just, right, hunting was just kind of, as a kid growing up, you learn how to shoot a gun, and then the next step was really small game in some cases, and then deer hunting. And it was just kind of a way of life. And I see a difference in my approach to hunting now than for the reasons why I got into it. I mean, now, I myself have a family as well, a little girl, and, I hunt because I love being outdoors. I love having that connection with nature, and I appreciate it. I appreciate the meat that I get from deer. And one of the things that and I'm really a stickler about is the whole idea of knowing where your food came from, right, and eating healthy and being healthy, and seeing your food, seeing the meat from the field all the way to the table. So that's one of the things I'm a big proponent of, and I find that I like you and like a lot of other people would certainly love to have the toad to put up on the wall and and kind of have that feeling that I think we're all kind of after. But at the same time, I'll be almost, I was just shy of saying just as happy, but almost as happy with just putting my fair share's worth of meat in the freezer for myself and my family, and going a step further, for close friends, having them over for dinner. I think that's a good thing to be able to share something like that with people you care about.
So yeah, Phil, I think you hit on a couple things there that are interesting and would make some really good follow-up podcast. One, I think it was interesting that you mentioned the sharing and community component of a hunter's harvest, right? I think a lot of folks overlook that, or a lot of non-hunters overlook that, or they're not aware of the community aspect of a hunter's harvest. We're as excited to share the venison or the elk or the duck or the turkey or whatever the case may be,
right,
with folks that we don't know or that we're friends with, as much as we're excited to consume it ourselves or share it with our families. And in some ways, for me at least, it's like if I find someone who is interested in eating wild game, who has not in the past and is not a hunter, I'm probably more excited about doing that because it gives me an opportunity to have a real conversation about hunting and what it means and how it should be done, appropriately or ethically, morally from my perspective at least, which always is, good to hopefully maybe turn someone who is not necessarily anti-hunting but maybe isn't in the know, make sure that they're on our side or on the good guy's side,
right.
as opposed to going to the dark side. The other thing that you mentioned that I thought was interesting was, how we're similar, that we grew up in the same state and had similar backgrounds in terms of how we learned how to hunt with our families, our dads and so forth. But the fact that you grew up hunting a lot of game lands and still do, and I've pretty much predominantly have hunted private land all my life, which some folks might look at that and
rub it in, why don't you?
Yeah, look at the fancy guy with his private land. I did do a bear hunt when I was a kid, that was on state game lands, and last year was actually my first whitetail public land hunt. And I got to tell you, I had probably as much of a rewarding feeling during that hunt as I have any hunt that I've had on private land. And the reason was that I took a piece of land that I knew nothing about. I had literally 2 hours to scout it. I did a speed scout during the summer, looked at Topo Maps, looked at the Google Maps and so forth, and pinpointed a place that I wanted to go to, did a quick speed scout of it, and then went there the opening weekend in September and climbed a tree. And 2 hours before dark, I had 3 bucks walk through. And for me, that was a big aha moment, and was maybe in some ways more gratifying than when I see deer, bucks or whatever, right, on private land, because I really had to work for that one, and it's, when you see some of these guys that are these, big buck killers that are killing big bucks on public land year after year, like Dan Enfalt, who I've followed some of his podcasts and have read some of his articles. This guy, if I'm not mistaken, consistently hunts public land almost exclusively, and is just harvesting huge deer. Like we're talking like 170, 180 class type bucks, which are just unreal. That in Pennsylvania, you'd be hard pressed to find something like that on private land or not.
Oh man, yeah. But just anywhere in the state, really.
Right, but those are toads no matter where you go, and he's doing that on public land. There's some, I won't say that there's tricks to the trade, but you got to be willing to work for it a little harder than the guy hunting private land, which is, have all the respect in the world for the folks who hunt public land, and do it with success.
I think there's an element of experience there too. It's if you're 2-3 years into hunting and you start hunting public lands, or you've been primarily hunting public lands, as opposed to somebody who's been doing this regardless of whether it's private or public. If they've been doing it for 20, 30, 40 years, any time in the field counts as experience regardless. So whether it's private or public. So if you take somebody who's doing 30 years experience and take them into a private land, they're going to know or have an idea of where to go a lot faster than somebody who's relatively new. And that's, experience isn't something you can teach. It's just,
Right.
you have to go and do it.
Yeah, I'm really excited for this upcoming archery season, as I know you and I kind of talked about it, and I know that I'm definitely going, and you and I are continuing to try to work out the dates.
Yes, sir.
But I'll be going to Ohio for a couple trips this year, and that will all be public land hunting, which I'm trying to get out here at the end of the month to start, to do my scouting. I'm a little behind the 8 ball in terms of timing here, but I'm really looking forward to that. I have no sense of what the expectation be for going out there, but just looking for nothing more than an experience, really.
Right.
And I'm sure I'll get that, and I'm sure I'll have a lot of what went wrong stories, but I'm hoping I have the one day of what went right.
Yeah, I think even though you might have a lot of what went wrong, I feel like there's going to be a lot of what went right that comes out of some of the what went wrongs, because even though it may not have gone right for the time that you were out there, there's a lot of learnings that you can take and apply moving forward. So you make that trip again, you can turn the wrongs into rights, hopefully.
Right, because it's certainly, hunting, regardless of where you're doing it, is most certainly an evolution.
Right.
It's not something that's static. But with that being said, the mention of what went right, what went wrong, I think we should go ahead and jump into some of our best and worst moments of 2015. And I'm going to let you tell your best and worst moments of 2015 first, because I want to make sure that I want to make sure I get to chime in on what I think might be the worst, in case you happen to gloss over it.
So, what the best moment of 2015 for me, I think, there were no toads to be had this year, unfortunately. But the best moment, it was kind of a best in disguise, because I had harvested a doe, a large and actually old doe. I've seen her around my parents' property a lot, and this was during rifle season. And typically I'm vitals all day, every day, and more often than not, it's a heart shot and drop them on the spot. And
because that's one thing I do know about you. It's like you're handy with a firearm. That's for sure.
I likes it a lot. No, but I thought I put a really nice shot on her. It was about maybe 30 yards, and she didn't go far by any means, maybe 20 yards if that. But I was really surprised she didn't drop, and I get up to her and I start dressing and start pulling everything out, and I notice I didn't get the heart as a straight double long, which is totally fine. But me being the kind of field to table advocate, the best part about it was I had this full intact, unharmed heart. And I'm thinking to myself, well, this is going in the freezer. Gonna eat it. Because, I would definitely, and a big proponent of using and utilizing as much of the animal as possible. I know that sounds a little cliche and maybe old school, but I think we really have to, respect, what we have here and respect the animal as much as possible. So that, to me, that was my best moment, I think. And I can be humble about that at least. But the worst moment, the worst moment came in archery season, actually. It was a day I'd taken off from work, and it was late morning, and it was middle of the rut, and I actually didn't see the doe, so I was bleeding, I was grunting. I started to hear some movement and then nothing. And I look over my shoulder, and there's a nice size buck there, a real thick 8-pointer that actually I haven't seen in the area. So it kind of took me by surprise, and I'm just waiting this guy out, and he's no more than, I would say, 20 yards away, but in some real thick brush. All I really see is his head.
Right, because where you hunt is all pretty much brush for the most part.
It's field brush, some intermittent trees, and it butts up against a wood line. And the wood line, it kind of opens up a little bit. The brush ceases, but where I typically hunt, I would consider it kind of the crossroads between where the deer feed and where they end up bedding. You see some beds in the brush, some really nice spots, but I don't think they typically spend their nights there. I think they spend their afternoons there.
Right.
So anyway, this buck comes out, and I could tell he's hot on a doe, even though I can't see it. And he's just coming out walking real slowly, kind of feeling it out. And I draw on him, and he's maybe, oh boy, I'd put him at about 15 yards. And this is rather embarrassing, but I draw on him, and just as I release, I jerked it. And I airmailed him by probably about 2 inches. And that's when you do that, especially from that distance. It's like heartbreaking. You're like, well, there it goes. It's done. I'm gonna go home. Season's over. I quit hunting forever. It's kind of like one of those bad drinking nights where you're like, I'm never drinking again, and then you do it the next night. So
until the next day when you need the hair of the dog.
Exactly. So I basically just brushed the top of him, no blood. He turned around, took one major hop, which is when I saw the full body size. I mean, it was a gigantic deer. Mm-hmm. And then stopped immediately right where he initially came in, turned around, and at that point I knew, okay, he's on to something. He's not going anywhere. And he didn't see the arrow, he didn't see me, he just heard it go into the brush. So literally about 10 minutes later, he starts coming back out again. And I have another arrow ready to go, draw back on him. And he takes just a slightly different route. So he's ever so slightly angling away instead of being completely broadside. And I release. And as I release, I see the arrow clip the tiniest of branches that's not even really in my vision of sight. It's just the tiniest branch that literally causes the arrow to careen high enough where I airmail him again. And at that point, he goes in the direction he was initially going in, and then I see the doe, and then they both go run off, and hopefully procreate to make some more monsters. But right. So that was a pretty depressing day, and that stuck with me for. I mean, it still sticks with me today, but I mean that stuck with me for a solid 2-3 weeks after that.
Right. I remember when I got that text, actually.
Right.
I was bumming for you because that's always a tough one. I think if I were going to say that was definitely 1A for your bad moments of the archery season. If I were going to provide a consolation prize winner, okay, I would say busting up your shoulder in old man softball right before the season. Which was the reason why you and I didn't get to do any hunts last year together. Right. Is because during the early season when I had when we had some weekends that aligned for us to do some hunts together,
I'm still doing rehab.
You were still rehabbing your busted up shoulder from old man softball. So I think the learning lesson from that is I hope you're not playing old man softball this year.
I actually am. And ironically enough, the first game I hit 2 home runs. So I should probably just retire. End on a high note. But
I would end on a high note. Speaking of high notes, I will, I guess, divulge my best and worst.
Let's get at it.
2015. I would like to say that my worst. I wish I had your worst because that would mean that I would have seen a really nice buck while I was at the farm during my quote unquote rutcation. I guess I'll start with the good first. Like you, I took a doe in archery season this year, the past 2 years. So that was great. I was super thankful for that. It was she kind of snuck up on me. Unfortunately, I was filming this year, and she came pretty quiet.
Right.
It was an area of the farm that hadn't been touched for the whole week, and it was getting toward the end of the week, and I just kind of took a flyer on it. I was like, you know what? No one sat here all week. It's the only place that it's virtually untouched. So, there really hasn't been any pressure, any human sent there. Hopefully something will run by. And at that point of the week, I was really just trying to fill the freezer.
Right.
She came rolling by at about 20 yards, provided me, gave me a perfect broadside shot. I think after I, ranged where she was actually standing, it was about 24, 25 yards. Perfect double lung shot. She ran maybe 40 yards and expired. There was not a lot of drama in it. I saw her drop. It was exciting to say the least. She was a big old doe. A lot of meat. It was nice. Same thing, no damage to the heart. So we actually pulled that out. We fried that up that evening
nice.
At camp, and I shared it with my father-in-law and Tate, who I hunt with pretty much all archery season. So that was kind of the highlight. And then, as I mentioned earlier, that public land hunt, even though I didn't get a shot at anything, an arrow at anything, seeing those 3 bucks on my first public land hunt for whitetail was a really close second to harvesting that doe, only because of the work that I put in from afar, and really just kind of had to rely on my ability to pick out good spots, read sign, and read maps, and make it happen. So that was
motivating. I mean, again, that's a huge victory, just in terms of experience and also understanding. Hey, you know what? It was a short amount of time, really unfamiliar with the territory, but you did what you could. You applied what skills you had, and you know what? You didn't come out with anything, but you saw 3 bucks. So. Yeah, that's definitely a win. Definitely a win.
Exactly. And then I think my worst, it was kind of, I think there wasn't any one bad moment from 2015. I think it was kind of the aggregate of a lot of things that kind of went on. So one, I mean, everyone, knows it's not a big secret, pretty much across the country it was this way. When we got into November, which was, your prime archery time, if you will, the weather just, the temperature just skyrocketed. It made it miserable. And unfortunately, I took my week of vacation pretty much that entire week that we had, high 60s to like mid 70s to mid 70s temperatures, which made hunting pretty tough. So that was part of the bad, and this next part wasn't necessarily bad. It was just something new. So this year was the first year I decided to film my hunts. And I was adamant about filming absolutely every hunt. So obviously there's more gear involved, there's more setup time involved, there's more teardown time involved. So after a week plus of hunting straight, like I was pretty beat, just from all the setup and teardown. It was taxing physically. And then this year I probably put more time into preparation than I have any other year. So mentally it was taxing, especially whenever the movement was so slow because of the weather, if you will. I know some people will say that the warm weather doesn't impact deer movement. I say science, yes. Experience, no. So it was a little frustrating from that perspective because I had a good beat on what was going on the property where deer were bedding, how they were moving, and just none of it came to fruition this year for whatever reason. And then probably I think the number one bummer of the year for me was there was one buck that I watched this summer. And then he stuck around on our property through October and then into November. And I did see him during rifle season. I had some pictures of him on camera. But I thought I knew where he was bedding. We had one live visual of him on the hoof. Beans, for those of you that don't know, Beans is my father-in-law. That's his nickname. He saw him on the hoof one afternoon, I think the weekend before I came in to hunt for rutcation. And so between the camera pictures and where he spotted him, I thought I had a pretty good idea where he may be bedding. I got a nice kind of rainy day on a Sunday, and for those of you that don't know, Sundays in Pennsylvania you can't hunt. So I used that opportunity to do some scouting and found his rub line, and I found where I thought he was bedding out on this point of the ridge behind, about 500-600 yards past the clover field. And I knew what wind he was working. He was working a west wind, and that was the only time you were seeing him in that area on the camera, whether it was in the clover field or whether it was in the hollow below. And I got the right wind on a Tuesday, and Beans, one of our friends was coming into turkey hunt, and he doesn't get a lot of time to turkey hunt, and he wanted to hunt down through the edge of that field back that point. And so being the nice guy that I am, I said, sure, go ahead. I'm here all week. Go ahead and, hunt that point. I'll go to another spot. Went to another spot, and he sure enough jumped that 8-point out of that bed. So the lesson there is whenever you have a good buck spot, do not let anybody hunt that spot. Give it up. Yeah, because he was laying right where I thought he was. I had a tree picked out that was about 40 to 50 yards away from where his bedding area kind of started. Mm-hmm. There was a specific down tree that I knew that he was likely bedding under. That was probably like 60 yards, 70 yards away. And sure enough, that's where he was at, and that's where he got jumped. And no one ever saw him again. He did come back, and I did see him on some camera pictures there in December.
Yeah, well after the season.
But yeah, and unfortunately, I don't think that he made it through rifle season, because I didn't see any pictures of him after that, and he was one that was on our property year-round. So that is my worst moment from 2015. But all things considered, I spent more days in the woods this year than I have in years past. I think for a guy who works a full-time job with a family like you, I was in the woods 21 days this year during deer season.
Yeah, nothing to balk at.
Yeah, so that was good. But I think we're running up on time here, because I know that you and I want to try to keep these to roughly the 30 to 45 minute variety. Of course, we'll run a little longer when the content dictates that we do, and something that's super interesting that we're talking about. But before we take off, I think we can wrap it up. But do you have any parting shots, if you will, for the listeners before we get out of here?
I wouldn't say any necessarily parting shots. I'm super excited to be involved in this. Like I said, and like you said, we've been talking about doing this for a while, and it's something we both pretty passionate about and big advocates for. And it's nice to be able to talk about doing this, hunting, and and just sharing experiences, and hopefully, in the near future, hearing from other people as well. So,
yeah, absolutely. So here at the end, we'll have just a little bit of housekeeping to do before we get out of here. If you have any questions you would like to ask us, you can visit truthfromthestand.com and go to our registration page to sign up for the newsletter and drop us a note letting us know if there are any questions you would like us to take on. Some of them maybe Phil and I will answer. Others, we may get some other folks involved to answer your questions. You can find us, obviously, on truthfromthestand.com. You can find these podcasts, as well as we'll be located on iTunes and Stitcher. So please go to those places, download us, listen to us, take us in your car, listen to us while you're at work and you don't want to do work, which is what I often do with podcasts. And if you feel so inclined, please leave us a 5-star rating on iTunes. We would greatly appreciate it. And leave a comment. We'd love to hear from you all. Until next time, we'll see you soon.